In Edge Strike Martial Arts neon-lit interior, a 75-year-old man in pressed khakis was about to request training. What seemed like a simple enrollment turned deadly serious when Sensei Rafe, Blitz Morales, and his viral-obsessed students decided to demonstrate their superiority. Arthur Hawkins wasn't your typical senior citizen looking for gentle exercise. For 32 years, he was United States Army Special Forces, known for training soldiers who went on to save lives in situations most couldn't imagine. When Rafe's star student Diego launched a flurry of tournament-winning strikes, they had no idea they were facing a man who'd killed with his bare hands when necessary. Hawk moved like water around every attack that would trigger a complete dismantling of everything the dojo thought it knew about martial arts. What began as an embarrassing social media moment would become a reckoning with authenticity. The flashy gym would never be the same after Seagal himself arrived to witness the difference between performance and mastery. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bass thumped through hidden speakers, vibrating the polished wooden floors of Edge Strike Martial Arts. Neon lights cut through artificial smoke, transforming what should have been a place of discipline into something between a nightclub and a movie set. Students moved in perfect synchronization, not from years of practice, but from following the choreography they'd learned on TikTok last week. At the center of it all stood Sensei Rafe, Blitz Morales, his muscled frame gleaming under spotlights, tribal tattoos snaking up his arms. Unlike traditional martial arts masters who wore modest GIs, Rafe sported compression gear with his personal logo emblazoned across the chest, a lightning bolt striking a fist. "Again," he commanded, voice booming through a wireless mic clipped to his ear. "Make it explosive. Remember, it's not just about the technique. It's about the show." 20 students punched the air in unison, phones on tripods capturing every moment. "Now rotate. Diego, get this angle," Rafe called to a lanky 19-year-old darting between students with a professional camera rig. Diego wore his backward cap and oversized Content King t-shirt like a uniform, marking him as firmly in the influencer camp rather than any martial tradition. "This is going to break 1 million views. I can feel it," Diego shouted, framing Rafe against the dojo's LED backlit logo wall. Rafe nodded, already mentally composing hashtags for tonight's posts. Among the students, 22-year-old Aya executed each move with precision, but her eyes held increasing frustration. She'd joined 3 months ago, hoping to find real self-defense training after a frightening encounter downtown. Instead, she found herself in what felt like extended auditions for a reality show. "Sensei," Aya called during a brief pause, "could we work on practical applications? Like what you'd actually do if someone grabbed you?" Rafe waved dismissively. "Aya, babe, you're thinking too small. We're building warriors here, not teaching bar fight moves. Trust the process." He gestured to the mirrors lining the walls, each reflecting the neon lightning bolt logos. "See that? That's the Edge Strike brand. We're not just teaching martial arts, we're creating a movement." Tyler, the assistant coach, stood at the edge of the mat, arms crossed. At 28, he'd been training seriously for over a decade, including 2 years in Thailand learning Muay Thai. Watching Rafe turn ancient disciplines into social media content made his jaw clench, but he needed the paycheck. "All right, everyone, final sequence," Rafe announced. "Remember, phones up for the finale. This is the money shot." The students formed a semicircle as Rafe launched into a series of spinning kicks and dramatic poses that looked impressive, but would leave any real fighter completely exposed. Diego captured it all, ensuring the LED lightning bolts were visible in every frame. Outside the glass front doors, Colonel Arthur Hawkins stood on the sidewalk, hands clasped behind his back. At 75, he moved carefully, his joints protesting after decades of hard use, but his posture still held the unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. He'd been standing there for 10 minutes, watching the spectacle inside with the analytical eye of someone who'd seen real combat. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Lonnie. "Dad, did you check out that martial arts place? You need to stay active, especially after Mom." Hawk's chest tightened. 6 months since the funeral. 6 months of rattling around the small apartment Lonnie had found for him near the hospital where she worked as an ER nurse. She worried about him, about the way he'd been withdrawing, spending too much time staring at old photographs and medals gathering dust. He looked back through the glass doors. The neon lights hurt his eyes, and the thundering music made him think of the nightclubs soldiers used to frequent on leave, all flash and no substance. But there was something else too. Young people moving their bodies, trying to learn discipline, even if they were going about it all wrong. Another text from Lonnie. "Promise me you'll try, Dad. You still have so much to teach." Hawk smiled despite himself. His daughter knew him too well. She'd understood that sitting still was killing him faster than any enemy ever could. He'd spent 30 years teaching soldiers how to survive, how to think clearly under pressure, how to channel aggression into purpose. Maybe he still had something to offer. Inside, Rafe was wrapping up his performance. "And that, my warriors, is how you dominate. Remember to tag us in your posts. #EdgeStrike, #Warrior Mindset, #No Limits." The students began collecting their phones and water bottles, chattering excitedly about the footage they'd captured. Aya hung back, approaching Tyler instead. "Coach Tyler, I know you trained in Thailand. Could you maybe show me some real techniques? Something that would actually work?" Tyler glanced around, making sure Rafe wasn't listening. "Look, I get it. But this is Rafe's show. He's built a brand here. But what about actual martial arts? What about discipline and respect? And I know," Tyler said quietly. "Trust me, I know. But sometimes you have to work within the system to change it." Aya's shoulders slumped. "I just feel like I'm wasting my time. Like we're all just pretending to be martial artists." Through the glass, Hawk saw the young woman's disappointed expression. Something in her posture, the way she held herself like she was carrying invisible weight, reminded him of young soldiers who'd come to him seeking not just training, but meaning. He took a deep breath, tasting the salty San Diego air, and pushed open the doors. The music hit him like a physical force, but he walked steadily toward the reception desk, his pressed khakis and button-up shirt making him look like someone's grandfather visiting for a school play. Several students glanced at him curiously, but most were too absorbed in reviewing their footage to pay attention. "Excuse me," Hawk said to the teenager behind the desk, raising his voice slightly over the music. "I was wondering about joining classes." The kid looked up from his phone, blinking in confusion. Classes? Like for you?" "Yes, for me." "Hold on, let me get Sensei Rafe." As the young man scurried away, Hawk noticed Aya watching him with undisguised curiosity. Their eyes met briefly, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod. Something about her respectful demeanor told him she understood what real training looked like, even if she hadn't found it yet. Rafe appeared, still glowing with post-workout endorphins and the satisfaction of creating content. When he saw Hawk, his expression shifted from confusion to poorly concealed amusement. "Sir, I think there might be some confusion. This is Edge. Strike Martial Arts, not a senior center program." Hawk met his gaze steadily. "I'm aware. I'm looking to train again." "Train?" Rafe's smirk widened. "Sir, no disrespect, but this isn't Tai Chi in the park. We do high-intensity combat training here. It's pretty intense." "I understand. I have some experience with combat training." Several students had stopped what they were doing to watch the exchange. Diego discreetly started recording, sensing viral content potential. Tyler stepped closer, something in the old man's calm demeanor triggering his instructor instincts. "What kind of experience?" Rafe asked, his tone walking the line between polite and patronizing. "Military. Special operations." "Oh, well, thank you for your service and all that," Rafe said, the phrase rolling off his tongue with practiced insincerity. "But YouTube documentaries and Call of Duty don't really prepare you for what we do here." "I wasn't referring to YouTube," Hawk said simply. The room had grown quieter now, other conversations fading as more students tuned in. Aya found herself holding her breath, watching the elderly man's face. There was something in his eyes, a depth of experience that made Rafe's bravado look like a child playing dress-up. "Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm," Rafe continued, playing to his audience now, "but liability issues alone. I mean, what happens if you get hurt? What happens if someone gets a little too aggressive and you can't keep up?" "Then I'll learn from it," Hawk said. "That's why I'm here. The simple honesty of the statement seemed to catch Rafe off guard. For a moment, his performer's mask slipped, revealing something more genuine underneath. But then he caught sight of Diego's camera, and the mask snapped back into place. "Tell you what," Rafe said, his voice taking on the tone of a game show host. "How about we start with a little demonstration? You know, see what you're working with, just to make sure you're ready for the edge strike way." Hawk nodded calmly. "That seems reasonable." As Rafe began clearing space on the mat, Tyler leaned close to Aya. "This doesn't feel right," he murmured. "No," she agreed, watching Hawk remove his shoes and step onto the mat with the careful precision of someone who'd done this countless times before. "It doesn't." But neither of them spoke up as Rafe called for the cameras to start rolling, and the neon lights suddenly seemed less like excitement and more like a spotlight on a stage where someone was about to be humiliated. The mat felt different under Hawk's bare feet, too soft, too cushioned. He'd trained on concrete floors, ship decks, and jungle clearings where a fall could mean death. This pristine surface, unmarked by real sweat or blood, spoke of a different kind of training altogether. "All right, everyone, gather around," Rafe announced, his voice carrying the excitement of a carnival barker. "We're going to have a little demonstration. Show our new friend here what edge strike is all about." Students formed a loose circle around the mat, phones appearing like magic. Diego positioned himself for the best angle, his camera's red recording, light casting an ominous glow. Tyler remained at the edge of the group, his expression growing more troubled by the moment. "Now, sir, what did you say your name was?" Rafe asked, though he hadn't bothered to ask before. "Hawk," came the quiet reply. "Hawk. I like it. Very military." Rafe grinned at his audience. "Now, Hawk, I want you to understand that what we do here isn't like the movies. This is real combat training. Athletic, dynamic, explosive. Are you sure you're ready for this?" Hawk simply nodded, his hands relaxed at his sides. He'd assumed a natural stance, not the exaggerated fighting poses he saw around him, but the balanced, ready position of someone who'd learned to move efficiently under pressure. "Okay then," Rafe said, circling him like a predator sizing up prey. "Let's start with something basic. Diego, come here." Diego eagerly handed off his camera to another student and bounded onto the mat, his energy infectious. At 19, he was all lean muscle and enthusiasm, wearing his black belt like a badge of honor despite having earned it in less than a year. "Diego here is one of our rising stars," Rafe announced. "Regional tournament winner, over 2 million followers across all platforms. He's going to show you some of our foundational techniques." Diego bounced on his toes, shadow boxing the air. "Don't worry, Gramps. I'll take it easy on you." The casual disrespect sparked something in Aya's chest, a flare of anger that surprised her. She found herself stepping forward slightly, though she didn't know why. "Now, Diego, I want you to show our friend here a basic entry drill," Rafe instructed. "Nothing too intense. Just demonstrate proper distance management and counter-striking." What Rafe didn't say, but what everyone understood, was that this was meant to be a lesson in humility. The old man would stumble, maybe fall, certainly be overwhelmed by Diego's speed and youth. It would be funny, shareable content, and a perfect demonstration of why edge strike was for serious athletes, not senior citizens. Diego approached with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real opposition. He threw a quick jab, more for show than effect, expecting Hawk to flinch or stumble backward. Instead, Hawk simply turned his shoulders slightly, and Diego's fist passed harmlessly by his ear. The movement was so subtle that most of the students missed it entirely, but Diego suddenly found himself off balance, his momentum carrying him forward into empty space. "Whoa," Diego laughed, recovering quickly. "Lucky dodge, old man." He tried again, this time with a combination jab, cross, hook. The strikes were fast and technically sound, the product of months of training and natural athleticism. They should have overwhelmed someone Hawk's age completely. Instead, Hawk moved like water. His feet shifted just enough to let the first punch slide past. His torso turned a fraction, making the second strike miss by inches. And when Diego's hook came around with genuine power behind it, Hawk's hand came up, not to block, but to gently redirect. Diego's own force spun him around. And suddenly he was looking at the ceiling as his back hit the mat with a resounding thud. The room fell silent except for the humming of the neon lights. Diego lay there for a moment, staring up at the lights, trying to process what had just happened. He'd thrown 3 solid strikes, and somehow he was the one on the ground. The old man was still standing in the same spot, hands at his sides, looking mildly concerned. "You all right, son?" Hawk asked, extending a hand to help Diego up. Diego accepted the help, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. Yeah, I'm fine. What did you? How did you?" "Lucky break," Hawk said simply, though his eyes met Tyler's across the mat. Tyler's expression had changed completely, the recognition of someone who'd seen real skill before. Rafe's smile had frozen on his face. This wasn't going according to script. "Well, that was interesting. Diego, you might have been going a little easy on him." "I wasn't going easy," Diego protested, his voice cracking slightly. "I mean, I was being careful, but I wasn't." "Let's try that again," Rafe interrupted, his tone sharper now. "This time, with proper intensity. We don't want anyone getting the wrong idea about our training standards." Aya watched the exchange with growing fascination. She'd seen something in those few seconds that everyone else had missed. The way Hawk's breathing had remained perfectly steady. The way he'd moved not faster than Diego, but more efficiently. There had been no wasted motion, no telegraphed movements, just pure economy of action. "Sensei," she said quietly, "maybe we should." "It's fine, Aya," Rafe cut her off. "This is a learning opportunity for everyone." Diego squared up again, but this time his confidence was shaken. He'd felt the old man's redirect, the way his own strength had been turned against him. It was unlike anything he'd experienced in tournaments or training. "You don't have to prove anything," Hawk said gently. "This is just practice." But Diego's pride was wounded now, and youth has its own kind of desperation. He came forward, with everything he had, a flurry of strikes that would have overwhelmed most opponents. His fists moved like pistons, his feet danced across the mat, and his technique was genuinely impressive. Hawk moved like he was walking through falling snow. Every punch found empty air. Every kick swept through space where he'd been a moment before. He didn't seem to be trying, didn't appear to be exerting himself at all. He was simply not there when the strikes arrived. And then, almost gently, he placed his palm against Diego's chest and pushed. Not hard, not violently, just a steady, unavoidable pressure that sent Diego sliding backward across the mat until he sat down hard, his back against the wall. The silence stretched out like a held breath. Tyler was the first to speak. "Where did you train?" he asked. Quietly, Hawk turned to look at him, and for a moment, the carefully maintained mask of the humble old man slipped. Tyler caught a glimpse of something deeper, eyes that had seen things, done things, survived things that most people couldn't imagine. "Here and there," Hawk said finally. "Different places, different times." Rafe's jaw worked silently. His entire worldview, his brand, his authority, his carefully constructed image, had just been quietly demolished by a 75-year-old man in khakis. Around the mat, students were looking at each other with expressions ranging from amazement to confusion to something that might have been respect. "That was..." Aya began, then stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "That was nothing," Hawk said, helping Diego to his feet again. "Your friend here has good technique, good speed. With the right training, he could be very effective." Diego nodded numbly, still trying to process what had happened. "How did you? Where did you learn to move like that?" "Same place you're learning now," Hawk replied. "On the mat. One day at a time." But as he said it, his eyes found Rafe's, and there was something in that gaze that made the younger man take an involuntary step backward. It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was more like a question. "What are you really teaching these kids?" Rafe's face was burning now, his carefully maintained composure cracking. He'd been made to look like a fool in front of his students, his authority undermined by someone who should have been easy prey. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. "Well," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "I think we've all learned something today. Haven't we, class?" The students murmured uncertain agreement, but their eyes kept drifting back to Hawk, who stood quietly in the center of the mat, breathing steadily, looking like he could do this all day. "Thank you for the demonstration," Hawk said politely. "I look forward to training with you all." As he walked toward the edge of the mat to collect his shoes, Aya found herself following him. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Excuse me, she said quietly. That was real, wasn't it? What you just did? Hawk paused, studying her face. He saw something there. A hunger for authenticity, for substance beneath the flash and noise. It reminded him of his daughter at that age, searching for something true in a world full of pretense. It was just practice, he said gently. But, yes, it was real. Would you teach me? I mean, really teach me? Before Hawk could answer, Rafe's voice cut across the dojo like a whip. All right, everyone, that's enough for today. Class dismissed. Diego, I want to see you. In my office. Now. As the students began filing out, chattering excitedly about what they'd witnessed, Aya lingered near Hawk. I meant what I said, she whispered. About learning. Really learning. Hawk nodded slowly. I think you're already learning, he said. You just need to trust what you're seeing. As he walked toward the exit, Tyler intercepted him. Hawk, he said quietly, I don't know what your background is, but that was impressive. More than impressive. It was just redirection, Hawk replied. Using force against itself. Basic physics. Tyler shook his head. That wasn't basic anything. That was mastery. Hawk paused at the door, looking back at the neon-lit dojo, at the students still discussing what they'd seen, at Rafe standing rigid with wounded pride near the office door. No, he said finally. That was just the beginning. The office door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the motivational posters on the walls. Rafe paced behind his desk like a caged animal, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Diego sat in the chair across from him, still looking, dazed from his encounter on the mat. What the hell was that? Rafe demanded, his voice rising. You're supposed to be a regional champion. You've got a black belt. And you let some geriatric in khakis make you look like a white belt on his first day. Sensei, I don't know what happened, Diego protested, his voice cracking slightly. I threw everything I had at him. He wasn't there. Like he knew what I was going to do before I did it. Rafe stopped pacing, his hands clenched into fists. He got lucky. That's all. Lucky breaks happen, but they don't happen twice. I don't think it was luck, Diego said quietly. The way he moved, the way he don't. Rafe's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare give me that mystical warrior bullshit. He's an old man who got lucky against a kid who was holding back. That's the story. That's the only story. Through the office window, they could see the main dojo floor where Tyler was leading the remaining students through cool-down stretches. His movements were precise, economical, nothing like the flashy choreography that usually ended there. Sessions. We need to control the narrative, Rafe continued, pulling out his phone. Diego, tell me you didn't post that footage. Diego's face went pale. I might have sent it to a few people. Just friends, you know? But it was so crazy. You thought what? That making your instructor look like an idiot would be good for the brand? Rafe's voice was climbing toward a shout. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to build this place? How many hours I've put into creating content, building followers, establishing credibility? I'm sorry, Sensei. I didn't think. No, you didn't think. That's exactly the problem. Rafe collapsed into his chair, running his hands through his hair. How many people did you send it to? Just like 5 or 6. Maybe 10. They're all local martial arts people, though. They understand that stuff. Happens in training. But even as Diego said it, his phone was buzzing with notifications. The footage was spreading faster than either of them had anticipated, passed along through the tight-knit community of martial artists in San Diego and beyond. Outside in the main dojo, Aya was gathering her things slowly, hoping to catch another glimpse of the old man when he returned. She'd seen something in those few minutes that had been missing from all her months of training at Edge Strike. Something real, something that connected to the deeper purpose she'd been searching for. Excuse me, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Hawk standing near the water fountain, looking somewhat uncertain. Up close, she could see the careful way he moved, the slight stiffness in his joints that spoke of old injuries and older age. But his eyes were clear and alert, missing nothing. I wanted to thank you, he said quietly, for standing up for me earlier, when that young man was being enthusiastic. You don't need to thank me, Aya replied. What you did out there? That was incredible. I've been training here for 3 months, and I've never seen anything like it. Hawks studied her face, noting the frustration and hunger for authenticity that she didn't bother to hide. What brought you here? To this place? Aya hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. I was attacked. Downtown, about 4 months ago. Nothing serious happened, but it scared me. I wanted to learn to defend myself, to feel capable. And have you learned to feel capable? She looked around the dojo, at the neon lights and motivational posters, at the camera equipment and branded merchandise. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm just learning to look like I'm capable. Like it's all performance. Performance has its place, Hawk said carefully. But it's not the same as preparation. What you did today, that was preparation, wasn't it? Not performance. Before Hawk could answer, the office door burst open and Rafe stormed out, his face flushed with anger. He spotted Hawk immediately and marched over, Diego trailing behind him like a reluctant shadow. We need to talk, Rafe announced, his voice carrying across the dojo. Tyler and the remaining students stopped what they were doing to watch. Of course, Hawk replied calmly. What can I do for you? You can start by explaining what kind of game you're playing here. Rafe's voice was tight, with barely controlled fury. You walk into my dojo, you embarrass my students, you make me look like a fool. I did none of those things, Hawk interrupted gently. I asked to train, and you suggested a demonstration. I simply participated. Participated? Rafe's voice rose. You made Diego look like a beginner. You undermined my authority in front of my students. I redirected some punches, Hawk said with the same calm tone. If that undermines your authority, perhaps the problem isn't with what I did. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around the dojo, students were openly staring now, sensing the conflict brewing between their instructor and the quiet old man who'd just turned their understanding of martial arts upside down. You want to see authority? Rafe snarled. You want to see what real training looks like? Fine. Tyler, clear the mat. Tyler hesitated. Sensei, maybe we should clear the mat. Rafe's voice echoed off the walls. If our friend here wants to train with us, let's show him what that really means. Hawk watched the younger man's face, seeing the wounded pride and desperate need to reassert dominance. He'd seen it before, in young officers who'd been challenged, in front of their men, in politicians who'd been caught in lies, in anyone whose identity was built on a foundation of image rather than substance. That's not necessary, Hawk said. I'm not here to challenge anyone. But you are challenging me, Rafe shot back. Every time you stand there with that calm, superior attitude, you're challenging me. Every time you make my students look at me like I don't know what I'm talking about, you're challenging me. I'm not doing any of those things, Hawk replied. I'm just being myself. Well, maybe yourself isn't welcome here. The words came out harsher than Rafe had intended, and he saw immediately how they landed. Aya's face darkened with anger. Tyler looked disgusted. Even Diego seemed uncomfortable with the naked hostility. Sensei, Tyler said carefully, maybe we should all take a step back and no. Rafe's voice was flat and final. If he wants to train here, he needs to understand what that means. This isn't some community center karate class. This is elite, training for elite athletes. And if he can't handle that, then maybe he should find somewhere else to play warrior. Hawk stood quietly for a moment, considering. He could leave. It would be easier, certainly more peaceful. He could find another dojo, one that better matched his expectations of what martial arts should be. But as he looked around the room, he saw Aya's disappointed face, Tyler's conflicted expression, and Diego's obvious confusion. These weren't bad people. They were just people who'd been taught to value the wrong things. All right, he said simply. Let's train. Rafe's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. Excellent. Diego, get the cameras running. Everyone else, gather around. It's time for a real demonstration. As the students formed a circle around the mat, Aya found herself next to Tyler. This isn't right, she whispered. He's 75 years old. I know, Tyler replied, his voice tight, with concern. But Hawk agreed to it. And maybe Rafe needs to learn this lesson. What if he gets hurt? Tyler looked at her seriously. I'm not worried about Hawk getting hurt. On the mat, Rafe was stretching with theatrical intensity, making sure everyone could see his flexibility and athleticism. He'd changed into his competition gear, form-fitting shorts and a rash guard that showcased his physique. In contrast, Hawk stood quietly in his button-up shirt and khakis, looking like someone's grandfather who'd wandered into the wrong room. Rules are simple, Rafe announced. Light contact sparring. First person to score 3 clean techniques wins. Think you can handle that? Hawk. The way he said the name made it sound like a joke, something to be mocked rather than respected. I'll do my best, Hawk replied. Rafe bounced on his toes, shadowboxing the air. Don't worry. I'll try to make it quick. Don't want to embarrass you too badly in front of the kids. As they faced each other across the mat, the difference between them was stark. Rafe was all coiled energy and visible preparation, muscles tense and ready to explode into action. Hawk stood with his hands at his sides, breathing steadily, looking almost bored. Ready? Rafe called out, not waiting for an answer before launching himself forward with a lightning-fast combination designed to overwhelm through sheer speed and aggression. But Hawk wasn't there. The first punch whistled past his ear as he turned slightly. The second missed by inches as he shifted his weight. The third found only air as he stepped forward, inside Rafe's guard, and gently placed his palm against the younger man's chest. Rafe found himself flying backward, his feet leaving the ground as he was lifted and thrown with what felt like no effort at all. He hit the mat hard, rolling to absorb the impact, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. "1," Hawk said quietly. Rafe scrambled to his feet, his face burning with embarrassment and fury. Around the circle, students were murmuring in amazement. Diego's camera captured every second of his instructor's humiliation. "Lucky shot," Rafe snarled, approaching more cautiously this time. "Let's see you do that again." He feinted left, then exploded right with a powerful kick aimed at Hawk's midsection. It was a technique he'd used successfully in dozens of tournaments, fast and powerful enough to score against much younger opponents. Hawk caught his foot with one hand, almost gently, and twisted. Rafe spun through the air like a dancer, landing face first on the mat with a sound like a dropped sandbag. "2," Hawk said, still in the same calm tone. This time, Rafe was slower to get up. His pride was more than wounded now. It was shattered. Around the circle, his students were no longer looking at him with admiration or even respect. They were looking at him with something that might have been pity. "This isn't over," he gasped, wiping blood from his nose. "One more? Best of 3. Are you sure?" Hawk asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "There's no shame in. I said it's not over." Rafe's final attack was pure desperation, a wild flurry of strikes with no technique or strategy. Behind them, he was fighting to save face now, to salvage something from the wreckage of his authority. Hawk moved like water flowing around stones, letting the attacks pass harmlessly by. And then, almost sadly, he reached out and touched Rafe's forehead with one finger. The younger man stopped as if he'd run into a wall, his momentum completely halted. He stood there swaying for a moment, then sat down hard on the mat, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. 3, Hawk said, extending his hand to help Rafe up. "Good match." But Rafe didn't take the offered help. He scrambled backward, away from the old man who'd just dismantled everything he thought he knew about martial arts. "What are you?" he whispered. Hawk considered the question seriously. "I'm a 75-year-old man who's been training longer than you've been alive, and I'm still learning." As he walked off the mat, the silence in the dojo was deafening. Then, slowly, Aya began to clap. Tyler joined her, then Diego, then the other students, until the entire dojo was applauding. Not for the spectacular techniques or the dramatic victory, but for the quiet dignity with which Hawk had handled himself. Only Rafe remained sitting on the mat, staring at his hands, trying to understand how his entire world had just collapsed around him. The notification sound on Diego's phone had been pinging nonstop for the past hour. What started as a simple video sent to 5 or 6 local martial arts friends had exploded across social media platforms like wildfire. The footage of Hawk dismantling Rafe with effortless grace had been shared, reshared, and analyzed by thousands of viewers who recognized real mastery when they saw it. Diego sat in his car outside the dojo, scrolling through the comments with growing anxiety. The video had already garnered 50,000 views on TikTok alone, and the numbers were climbing rapidly. "Holy shit, who is this old man?" read one comment with over 1,000 likes. "This is what real martial arts looks like," read another. "That instructor just got schooled by someone's grandpa faced with tears of joy." But it was the comment from a traditional martial arts _SD that made Diego's blood run cold. Sensei Rafe, Blitz Morales getting absolutely destroyed by a 75-year-old. This is why flashy gyms are a joke. Real recognize real. That comment had been shared by 3 different martial arts influencers, each with their own scathing commentary about McDojo culture and Instagram. Martial artists. Diego's phone rang. It was his cousin Miguel, who ran a traditional karate dojo in Oceanside. "Dude, what the hell is this video you posted?" Miguel's voice was excited. "Who is this old man? Where did he train?" "I don't know," Diego admitted, slumping in his seat. "He just walked in and asked to join." Sensei Rafe wanted to embarrass him, but the old man embarrassed Rafe instead. "Bro, this is going everywhere. I've had 3 people send it to me already, and it's only been an hour." After hanging up, Diego reluctantly walked back into the dojo. The late afternoon class was supposed to start in 30 minutes, but the building felt different now, charged with tension and uncertainty. Rafe's office door was closed, but angry voices could be heard through the thin walls. In the main training area, Aya and Tyler were talking quietly near the water fountain. They looked up as Diego approached, their expressions unreadable. "How bad is it?" Tyler asked, nodding toward Diego's phone. "Viral," Diego said simply. "Like, really viral. And not in a good way for Sensei Rafe." Aya shook her head. "This is what he gets for trying to humiliate an old man. Did you see how calm Hawk was? Even when Rafe was being completely disrespectful, he never lost his composure." "That's what real masters look like," Tyler said quietly. "I trained in Thailand for 2 years, and the best fighters there all had that same quality, completely relaxed until they needed to move, and then it was like watching water flow." "Do you think Hawk will come back?" Aya asked. "After what happened?" Before anyone could answer, the front door chimed and Hawk walked in, moving with the same careful dignity he'd shown earlier. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and track pants now, and carried a small gym bag. Several students who'd been stretching stopped what they were doing to stare. "Excuse me," Hawk said to the teenager at the front desk. "I was wondering about class times. I'd like to sign up for regular training." The young man behind the counter looked panicked. Let me get someone who can help you with that." As he scurried toward Rafe's office, Aya approached Hawk with a warm smile. "You came back," she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. "I said I wanted to train," Hawk replied. "I meant it. Even after what happened earlier?" Hawk's expression grew thoughtful. "Especially after what happened earlier. I think this place needs what I have to offer, and I think I can learn something here too." Tyler stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Tyler, the assistant instructor. I wanted to apologize for how you were treated today." Hawk shook his hand with a firm grip. "No apology necessary. Everyone was doing what they thought was right." "What you did out there?" Tyler paused, searching for the right words. "I've been training for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it. The way you moved, the control you showed, that was mastery." "That was just experience," Hawk corrected gently. "And everyone here can develop that same awareness, given time and proper training." From across the dojo, Diego watched the interaction with growing fascination. The comments on his video were becoming increasingly specific about Hawk's likely background: former military, special forces, possibly intelligence work. Several users were analyzing his movement patterns and techniques, trying to identify his training origins. One comment from a verified account caught Diego's attention. "Movement patterns suggest CQB training, possibly Delta or similar. Watch how he controls distance and angles. This isn't sport martial arts. This is combat application." The office door finally opened, and Rafe emerged looking haggard. His usual pre-class energy was completely absent, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to desperation. He spotted Hawk immediately, and his face darkened. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the dojo. "I came to train," Hawk replied simply. "Isn't that what dojos are for?" "Not this dojo. Not anymore." Rafe's voice was rising again. "You've done enough damage for one day." "I haven't done any damage," Hawk said calmly. "I participated in the activities you suggested. You humiliated me. In front of my students. In front of the cameras." Rafe gestured wildly. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation?" Around the dojo, students were gathering to watch the confrontation. Several had their phones out, sensing another viral moment in the making. Your reputation is your own responsibility, Hawk said, his voice gentle but firm. I simply responded to what was presented to me. Get out, Rafe snarled. Get out of my dojo and don't come back. Sensei, Aya interjected, stepping forward. He just wants to train. Why can't? Shut up, Aya. This doesn't concern you. The sharp rebuke made Aya flinch, but it also sparked something in Tyler's eyes. Hey, that's not. I said shut up. All of you. Rafe was spiraling now, his carefully maintained image crumbling in real time. This is my dojo. Mine. I built this place. I created this program. And I won't have some geriatric fraud coming in here. And fraud? The word came from Hawk so quietly that it cut through Rafe's tirade like a blade. For the first time since the confrontation began, the old man's composure showed a crack, not of anger, but of something much more dangerous. Is that what you think I am? Hawk continued, his voice still soft, but carrying an edge that made several students unconsciously step backward. A fraud? Rafe seemed to sense that he'd crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. What else should I call it? You come in here with your mysterious background. You refuse to explain your training. You want to know about my training? Hawk interrupted. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rafe nodded, though something in the old man's tone suggested he might regret the answer. 32 years, United States Army Special Forces. 6 combat deployments. Across 3 continents. Trained in 17 different martial disciplines from 14 different countries. Instructor certification in close quarters combat, survival techniques, and psychological operations. Hawk's voice remained calm, but each word landed like a physical blow. I've taught senators, generals, and heads of state. I've trained soldiers, who went on to save lives in situations you couldn't imagine. The dojo had gone completely silent. Even the ambient music seemed to have stopped. I've killed people with my bare hands when it was necessary to complete the mission or protect innocent lives. I've also spent the last 5 years of my career teaching de-escalation and conflict resolution because I learned that true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about knowing when not to fight. Rafe's face had gone pale. Around the room, students were staring at Hawk with a mixture of awe and something approaching fear. So when you call me a fraud, Hawk continued, you're not just insulting me. You're insulting every soldier I trained, every mission I completed, every life I saved or took in service of this country. And that, young man, is something I won't tolerate. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then Diego's phone buzzed with a notification and the spell was broken. Oh, shit, Diego whispered, looking at his screen. Sensei, you need to see this. Rafe snatched the phone, his hands shaking slightly as he read. His face went from pale to green as he scrolled through the comments and shares. 200,000 views, he said hoarsely. It's got 200,000 views. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the new comment that had just appeared, verified with a blue checkmark next to a name that made Rafe's blood run cold at Steven Seagal. Interesting. Very interesting. What's the address of this place? Tyler read over Rafe's shoulder and let out a low whistle. Holy shit. Steven Seagal just commented on our video. Steven Seagal? Aya asked. The actor? The martial artist, Tyler corrected. The guy's a legitimate 7th Dan Aikido master. If he's interested in this place. Rafe's hands were shaking now as he stared at the comment. Steven Seagal. Wanting to visit his dojo should have been the opportunity of a lifetime. The kind of celebrity endorsement that could transform a regional gym into a national brand. Instead, given the context of the video, it felt like a death sentence. He's coming here, Rafe whispered. Steven fucking Seagal is coming to my dojo because of a video where I get my ass kicked by a senior citizen. Hawk watched the younger man's breakdown with something that might have been sympathy. You know, he said quietly, it's not too late to learn from this. Learn what? Rafe snapped, desperation making his voice crack. That martial arts isn't about looking strong, Hawk replied. It's about being strong. And sometimes being strong means admitting when you're wrong. Before Rafe could respond, Diego's phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message that made his eyes widen. Sensei? Steven Seagal just DM'd me. He wants the dojo's address. He says he's in San Diego and wants to stop by. When Rafe asked, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer, Diego swallowed hard. Tonight. He's coming tonight. The evening class had barely begun when the front door opened with a soft chime that somehow commanded more attention than any dramatic entrance could have. Steven Seagal stepped inside, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of controlled motion. At 73, he carried himself with the same quiet authority that had made him legendary, though time had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of experience beyond what movies could convey. He wore simple black clothing, a polo shirt and slacks that looked expensive but understated. No entourage, no cameras, no fanfare. Just a man walking into a dojo to see what had caught his attention online. The effect on the room was immediate and electric. Students froze mid-technique, phones appeared as if by magic, and Rafe's face cycled through a rapid succession of emotions, excitement, terror, and something approaching nausea. "Good evening," Steven said simply, his voice carrying the same calm authority as his movement. His eyes swept the room, taking in the neon lights, the camera equipment, the branded merchandise, and finally settling on the mat where Rafe stood like a deer in headlights. "Mr. Seagal," Rafe managed, his voice cracking slightly. This is an incredible honor. I can't believe you're actually here." Steven nodded politely but didn't return the enthusiasm. Instead, he looked around the dojo with the analytical gaze of someone who'd seen real training facilities in dozens of countries. His expression was carefully neutral, but those who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs of disappointment. "Interesting setup you have here," he said finally. "Very modern." The way he said modern made it sound like a disease. "Thank you. Yes, we pride ourselves on staying current with training methodologies and social media integration," Rafe babbled, completely missing the undertone. "We're really pushing the boundaries of what a martial arts dojo can be in the digital age." Steven's gaze moved past Rafe to where Hawk stood quietly near the back of the group. The two older men made eye contact, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended words. Steven's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of genuine interest since he'd entered. "And you must be the gentleman from the video," Steven said, walking past Rafe as if he didn't exist. "Arthur Hawkins, if I'm not mistaken." Hawk's eyebrows rose slightly. "You know who I am?" Word travels fast in certain circles, especially when someone demonstrates that level of skill. Steven extended his hand, and Hawk shook it with the respect of one master greeting another. 32nd Special Forces, right? Did some consulting work with various agencies after retirement? That's right, Hawk confirmed, clearly surprised by the recognition. "I worked with some of your former students in Eastern Europe." Small world. Steven's smile was genuine now, the first real warmth he'd shown since entering. "They spoke very highly of your training methods." The exchange was lost on most of the students, but Tyler and Aya were watching with growing fascination. This wasn't just a celebrity dropping by. This was a consultation between professionals who operated on a level far above anything they'd imagined. "So," Steven said, turning back to address the room, "I understand there was some sort of demonstration earlier today." Rafe stepped forward eagerly, seeing an opportunity to control the narrative. "Yes. Well, we were just having a friendly sparring session. You know how it is. Sometimes the camera catches things at awkward angles, makes it look more dramatic than it really was." Steven's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Awkward angles," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you call it?" "Well, I mean, Arthur here got a few lucky breaks, but lucky breaks." Steven's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it more menacing. "Let me ask you something, young man. In your professional opinion, how many lucky breaks does it take to completely dismantle someone in front of their own students?" Rafe's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. "Because from where I'm standing," Steven continued, "what I saw in that video wasn't luck. It was 40 years of training meeting someone who mistakes performance for substance." The silence that followed was deafening. Students looked back and forth between their instructor and the legend who was quietly dismantling his credibility with surgical precision. "Now," Steven said, his tone shifting to something that might have been educational, "I'm curious about your training methods here. Would you mind showing me a typical demonstration? It wasn't really a request. Rafe nodded frantically, turning to his students. Of course. Diego, Andre, let's show Mr. Seagal our advanced sparring techniques. As the two young men took positions on the mat, Stephen walked to the side where Hawk was standing. This should be interesting, he murmured. Diego and Andre began their demonstration, the same flashy, choreographed sequence they performed dozens of times for social media. High kicks, spinning techniques, dramatic takedowns that looked impressive but left both fighters completely exposed to real attacks. Stephen watched with the expression of someone examining an interesting but ultimately disappointing specimen. When they finished with their trademark synchronized bow, he nodded slowly. Very athletic, he said finally. Very energetic. Tell me, what would you do if your opponent didn't cooperate with the choreography? Sir, Diego looked confused. Your techniques assume your opponent will stand still and let you complete them. What happens when they don't? Well, we adapt. Of course, Andre said, puffing out his chest. We're trained to handle any situation. Are you? Stephen's tone remained conversational, but there was an undertone that made the hair on the back of necks stand up. Would you mind demonstrating? Just a light sparring session. Nothing dramatic. Andre looked to Rafe, who nodded encouragingly. This was their chance to redeem themselves, to show that they were legitimate martial artists despite the earlier embarrassment. Andre approached Stephen with the confident swagger of someone who dominated regional tournaments. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle, he had every physical advantage except the one that mattered most: experience against someone who actually knew what they were doing. Ready when you are, sir, Andre announced, bouncing on his toes and throwing a few practice punches. Stephen simply stood there, hands at his sides, looking almost bored. Whenever you're ready. Andre came forward with a combination that had served him well in competition: jab, cross, hook, followed by a takedown attempt. It was fast, powerful, and technically sound by sport fighting standards. Stephen moved like smoke. The punches found nothing but air as he seemed to simply shift his position without visible effort. When Andre's takedown attempt came, Stephen wasn't there. He was somehow behind Andre, one hand resting lightly on the younger man's shoulder. Andre spun around, surprised and off balance. How did you? Stephen was already moving again, flowing around Andre's attempted grapple like water around a stone. In a movement almost too quick to follow, he guided Andre's own momentum against him. The big man found himself on the ground, staring at the ceiling, with no clear understanding of how he'd gotten there. The problem with choreography, Stephen said calmly, helping Andre to his feet, is that it only works when everyone knows the script. Around the mat, students were staring in stunned silence. This wasn't the dramatic, flashy demonstration they were used to seeing. This was something else entirely. A clinical lesson in the difference between looking dangerous and being dangerous. Rafe's face had gone ashen. His best student, his poster boy for the edge strike method, had been neutralized as easily as a child. Would anyone else like to try? Stephen asked, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. The silence stretched until Tyler stepped forward, his expression respectful but determined. Unlike Andre's cocky swagger, Tyler approached with the measured caution of someone who'd trained in real fighting environments. His 2 years in Thailand had taught him to recognize authentic skill when he saw it. I'd be honored, sir, Tyler said, bowing formally. But I should mention, I'm not looking to prove anything. I just want to learn. Stephen's expression warmed. Slightly. That's the first intelligent thing anyone's said since I walked in here. What's your background? 2 years Muay Thai in Bangkok. Some BJJ here locally. I know enough to know that I don't know much. Humility, Stephen nodded approvingly. That's where real learning begins. He gestured for Tyler to approach. Show me what you learned in Thailand. Tyler moved with genuine technique. Proper stance, hands up, measured footwork. When he threw his first combination, it was crisp and purposeful, not the flashy nonsense Andre had attempted. A solid jab-low kick combination that would have scored in any ring. Stephen deflected the jab with minimal effort and caught the kick, but instead of throwing Tyler, he held the position and began to teach. Good technique, he said, still holding Tyler's leg. But watch your balance. In Thailand, they taught you to commit to the kick, yes? Full power, full commitment. Tyler nodded, slightly off balance but listening intently. That works in the ring, where there are rules. But in real combat, Steven shifted slightly, and Tyler found himself completely helpless, his standing leg barely keeping him upright. Commitment becomes vulnerability. Steven released the kick and reset Tyler's stance with gentle adjustments. Try again. This time, think about what happens after the technique. Where are your hands? Where's your balance? What if I don't react the way you expect? Tyler nodded and tried again, this time pulling back slightly on his commitment. The technique was less powerful but more controlled. Better, Steven acknowledged. Now you're thinking like a fighter instead of a competitor. He turned to address the entire class, using Tyler's technique as a teaching moment. Competition fighting is chess. You make moves within accepted rules. Real combat is more like improvised jazz. You have to be ready to adapt to whatever happens. Aya stepped forward from the group. Mr. Seagal, could you show us the difference? I mean, how would you handle someone attacking you for real? Steven considered the question seriously. The goal in real combat isn't to look impressive. It's to end the threat as quickly and safely as possible. Often, that means not fighting at all. He gestured for Diego to approach. Come at me like you're trying to hurt me, not like you're performing for cameras. Diego hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of actually attacking a 73-year-old legend. I don't want to. You won't hurt me, Steven said with absolute certainty. But you might learn something about the difference between aggression and effectiveness. Diego came forward with genuine intent this time, throwing a hard right. Cross aimed at Steven's head. It was fast, well-aimed, and powerful enough to cause real damage. Steven moved his head approximately 2 inches to the left. The punch missed by a hair's breadth, and suddenly Diego was stumbling forward, completely off balance. Steven's hand came up, not to strike, but to gently guide Diego's momentum in a new direction. The young man found himself face-first against the wall, with Steven's arm controlling his position in a way that was utterly inescapable but caused no pain. See the difference? Steven asked conversationally, as if he wasn't currently restraining a man 40 years younger than himself. I didn't try to overpower him. I didn't try to hurt him. I simply redirected his energy in a direction that was more convenient for me. He released Diego, who turned around with wide eyes and newfound respect. That's what real martial arts looks like, Steven continued. Minimum effort, maximum effect. Control without damage. Strength without brutality. From the back of the group, Rafe finally found his voice. But that's not practical for competition. You can't use those techniques in tournaments. Steven turned to look at him with an expression that was almost pitying. And there's your problem. You've confused martial arts with martial sports. They're related, but they're not the same thing. He walked over to where Rafe stood, his movement casual, but somehow making the younger man nervous. Tell me, what do you think martial arts are for? To compete? To prove yourself? To build confidence and fitness? Those are side effects, Steven said calmly. Martial arts, real martial arts, are about developing the kind of person who doesn't need to prove themselves. They're about building character that makes conflict unnecessary. He gestured around the dojo. All of this, the lights, the cameras, the branded merchandise, it's focused on the externals. But martial arts are internal. They're about becoming the kind of person who can remain calm under pressure, who can think clearly when others panic, who can protect without destroying. Rafe's face was burning with embarrassment, but something in Steven's tone suggested this was education, not humiliation. I'm not saying competition is wrong, Steven continued, or that building a successful business is wrong. But when the business becomes more important than the principles, when the performance becomes more important than the person, that's when you lose what makes martial arts meaningful. He turned back to the students. Who can tell me what the real purpose of training is? Aya raised her hand tentatively. To learn to defend yourself? Closer, but not quite. Anyone else? Tyler spoke up. To learn not to need to defend yourself? Steven smiled, the first truly warm expression he'd shown all evening. Now you're getting it. The highest level of martial arts is the fight that never happens. The conflict that's resolved before it begins. The strength that makes violence unnecessary. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each student. Every technique you learn, every hour you spend training, should be making you into someone who needs those skills less, not more. The words hit the room like a revelation. Students who'd been training for months suddenly saw their practice in an entirely different light. But how do you train for that? Diego asked, genuinely curious now. How do you practice not fighting? Steven's smile widened. You start by learning from someone who understands the difference between being able to fight and needing to fight. He nodded toward Hawk. Fortunately, you have exactly that person right here. All eyes turned to Hawk, who looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Steven's being generous. I'm just an old soldier who learned a few things along the way. A few things, Steven repeated with amusement. Arthur, why don't you show them what real training looks like? Hawk hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, but we'll need to change some things around here first. Hawk moved to the center of the mat with the deliberate pace of someone who'd learned that rushing led to mistakes. The neon lights suddenly seemed garish and distracting, their pulsing rhythm at odds with the calm focus he was trying to establish. First thing, he said quietly, though his voice carried clearly through the space. Can we turn off the music and dim those lights? Real training requires real focus. Tyler moved quickly to the controls, and suddenly the dojo was transformed. The harsh neon gave way to soft overhead lighting, and the absence of thumping bass made the space feel larger, more serious. It was the difference between a nightclub and a temple. Better, Hawk nodded. Now, everyone sit on the mat. We're going to start with something that might seem boring, but it's the foundation everything else is built on. The students settled onto the floor, their usual energy subdued by the change in atmosphere. Rafe remained standing at the edge of the group, his arms crossed, clearly struggling with having his authority usurped, but unable to object with Seagal watching. Breathing, Hawk said simply. Close your eyes and focus on your breath. Not controlling it, not changing it, just noticing it. Diego shifted uncomfortably. Is this like meditation or something? It's like training, Hawk replied calmly. Everything in martial arts starts with awareness. You can't respond appropriately to a threat you don't see coming. You can't make good decisions when your mind is scattered, and you can't access your skills when you're panicked. Aya closed her eyes immediately, grateful for something that felt authentic after months of flashy choreography. Around her, other students followed suit, though some seemed skeptical. Breathe in for 4 counts, Hawk instructed. Hold 4. 4. Out for 4. Hold for 4. Let your mind settle. As the room grew quiet, Steven watched with approval. This was what he'd hoped to see. Someone teaching the internal aspects that made external techniques meaningful. After several minutes of breathing, Hawk spoke again. Without opening your eyes, tell me what you're aware of. What do you hear? What do you feel? The air conditioning, Aya said softly. Cars outside, added Tyler. My heartbeat, said another student. Good. Real awareness isn't just about seeing attacks coming. It's about understanding your environment, your own state, the emotional temperature of a room. All of that information helps you make better decisions. He had them open their eyes. Now stand up, but do it slowly, paying attention to how your body moves, where your balance is, what feels stable and what doesn't. The simple act of standing became a lesson in body mechanics and spatial awareness. Students who'd been throwing flashy kicks minutes earlier were suddenly conscious of their own movement in a completely new way. Partner up, Hawk instructed. Face each other, arms length apart. We're going to practice the most important martial arts skill there is. What's that? Diego asked. Listening. He demonstrated with Aya, having her extend her hand toward his chest. She's going to push. Not hard, just steady pressure. My job isn't to resist the push or block it. It's to feel where the pressure is going and move with it. As Aya pushed, gently, Hawk seemed to melt around the pressure, turning slightly so that her force carried him in a circle rather than backward. The movement was so smooth it looked like dancing. The force isn't my enemy, he explained. It's information. It tells me where my partner is committed, where their balance is, what direction they're moving. Once I understand that, I can use their energy instead of fighting against it. He had the students practice the exercise, walking between pairs, and making gentle corrections. Don't resist. Don't collapse. Find the place where you can feel what they're doing and work with it instead of against it. Steven watched from the sideline, noting how Hawk's teaching methods were the opposite of everything they'd seen earlier. Where Rafe had emphasized power and flash, Hawk focused on sensitivity and efficiency. Where the previous training had been about imposing your will. This was about understanding and adapting. This is boring, Andre muttered after a few minutes of the gentle exercise. Hawk overheard him. You think so? Try pushing harder. Andre applied more pressure, expecting to overwhelm the old man's technique through pure strength. Instead, he found himself spinning through the air and landing on his back for the second time that evening. Still boring? Hawk asked, helping him up. Andre shook his head, his eyes wide. The same principles work regardless of the level of force, Hawk explained. But you have to master them at a low level first. If you can't feel a gentle push and respond appropriately, you'll never be able to handle real aggression. He turned to address the whole class. This is why traditional training seems slow and boring to people used to modern methods. We're building sensitivity and awareness that takes time to develop. There are no shortcuts to understanding. Aya found herself paired with Tyler for the next exercise. As they worked together, she experienced something she'd never felt in months of edge strike training. A sense of genuine learning, of skills developing at a deeper level than mere technique. I can feel what you're doing, she said wonderingly. As Tyler applied pressure, and she found herself moving in response without conscious thought. That's the beginning, Hawk nodded. When you can feel what's happening, you can start to influence what happens next. From the edge of the mat, Rafe watched his students engage with Hawk's teaching in a way they'd never engaged with his. There was no excitement, no adrenaline, no social media potential, but there was something else. A quality of attention and focus that made their previous training look superficial. This isn't going to get views, he said to Steven, his voice tight with frustration. This isn't what people want to see. Steven looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. Is that what you think this is about? Views? It's about building a business. It's about reaching people, inspiring them to train. You can't do that with boring meditation and gentle pushing exercises. Can't you? Steven's tone was genuinely curious. Look at your students. Really look at them. Rafe followed his gaze and saw students who were completely absorbed in what they were doing. Aya was working with a level of focus he'd never seen from her. Diego had stopped thinking about camera angles and was genuinely trying to understand the principles Hawk was teaching. Even Andre, his star athlete, was moving with a new quality of attention. They're learning, Steven said simply. Not performing, not competing, learning. When was the last time you saw that happen in here? The question hit Rafe like a physical blow because he couldn't answer it. When had learning become secondary to content creation? When had genuine development taken a backseat to viral potential? Hawk called for the class to stop and gather around him again. We've covered breathing and basic sensitivity. Next time, we'll work on how those principles apply to more dynamic situations. But remember, everything builds on these foundations. You can't skip steps and expect to develop real skill. As students began collecting their things, there was a different quality to their conversations. Instead of immediately reviewing footage and planning social media posts, they were discussing what they'd felt and learned. Thank you, Aya said to Hawk as she prepared to leave. That was what I've been looking for. It's just the beginning, Hawk replied. Real development takes time. But if you're willing to put in the work, you'll find that martial arts can give you much more than just fighting skills. As the last students filed out, Rafe found himself alone on the mat with Hawk and Steven. The dojo felt different now, less like a stage and more like a place where serious work could happen. I need to talk to him, Steven said quietly to Hawk. Alone? Hawk nodded and began gathering his things. As he reached the door, he turned back to Rafe. What you've built here has potential, he said. But potential is just possibility. What you do with it determines whether it becomes something meaningful or just another business that happens to involve martial arts. After Hawk left, Rafe found himself face to face with Steven Seagal in the dim lighting of his transformed dojo. The conversation that followed would change everything. The dojo felt different with just the two of them there. Older, more serious, stripped of its performative energy. Steven moved to the center of the mat and sat down cross-legged with the fluid grace of someone who'd been doing it for decades. After a moment's hesitation, Rafe joined him, though his posture was tense and defensive. You're angry, Steven observed. It wasn't a question. Of course I'm angry, Rafe exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. I've spent 5 years building this place. 5 years creating a brand, developing a following, establishing myself in this community. And then some old man walks in and destroys everything in one afternoon. Stephen listened without judgment, his expression calm and attentive. What did he destroy exactly? My credibility, my authority, the respect of my students. Rafe's voice was rising. They were looking at him the way they used to look at me, like he had all the answers. And what were you giving them before he arrived? The question caught Rafe off guard. I was giving them confidence, skills, a way to feel powerful in a world that tries to make them feel weak. Were you? The simple query hung in the air like a challenge. Rafe's mouth worked silently for a moment before the words came pouring out. You don't understand what it's like trying to run a business in this environment. Everyone's an expert because they watched YouTube videos. Everyone thinks they know better because they read some article about traditional training. I had to adapt. I had to give people what they wanted: excitement, energy, results they could see immediately. And what did you want? I wanted to be successful. I wanted to matter. I wanted. Rafe's voice cracked slightly. I wanted to be respected. Stephen nodded slowly. I understand that. More than you might think. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've never had to worry about any of this. You're Steven Seagal. People respect you automatically. You think it was automatic? Stephen's voice carried a note of dry amusement. You think I never had to prove myself? Never had my credibility questioned? Never had someone make me look foolish in front of people whose opinions mattered to me? Rafe looked up, surprised by the personal nature of the admission. I spent years making movies where I played invincible heroes, Stephen continued. You know what that got me? A reputation as a joke among serious martial artists. They thought I was all Hollywood bullshit, no substance. I had to work twice as hard to prove that I actually knew what I was doing. But you did prove it. Eventually. But not by trying to be what I thought people wanted me to be. I proved it by becoming what I actually was. Someone who dedicated his life to understanding martial arts at a deeper level than just fighting techniques. Stephen shifted slightly, his gaze direct and unwavering. That's your problem, Rafe. You've been so focused on appearing to be a master that you've stopped trying to become one. The words hit like a physical blow. Rafe felt something fundamental shift inside him, like a foundation cracking under pressure. How do you know what I've been trying to become? He asked, but the defensiveness in his voice was weaker now. Because I was you, 20 years ago. Different circumstances, same core issue. I was so caught up in my image, so invested in being seen as the best, that I lost sight of what actually made someone good at this. Stephen gestured around the dojo. All of this, the lights, the cameras, the social media presence, it's not wrong in itself. But when it becomes the point instead of the means, when you start caring more about looking like a martial artist than being one, that's when you lose your way. So what am I supposed to do? Start over? Admit that everything I've built is worthless? No, Stephen said firmly. You're supposed to build on what you have, but with different priorities. What did you see tonight when Hawk was teaching? Rafe thought back to the breathing exercises, the gentle partner work, the way his students had engaged with the material. They were focused, really focused, more than I'd seen them in months. Why do you think that was? Because it was new? Because you were here watching? Stephen shook his head. Because he was teaching them something real, something that connected to what martial arts are actually about. And they could feel the difference. But how do I do that? I don't have his background. I haven't spent 30 years in special forces. I haven't trained with masters around the world. You don't need his background, Stephen said. You need his approach. You need to stop trying to impress people and start trying to serve them. What's the difference? When you're trying to impress, everything is about you. Your techniques, your skills, your reputation. When you're trying to serve, everything is about them. Their development, their understanding, their growth as human beings. Stephen stood up and walked to the mirror wall, studying his reflection. For a moment, I'll tell you something that might surprise you. The techniques Hawk showed tonight, I've seen them before. They're not secret military moves. They're basic Aikido principles that any serious student can learn. Then why did they look so powerful? Because he's internalized them. He's not performing the techniques. He's expressing the principles. There's a difference. Rafe struggled to understand. How do you get from one to the other? Time, consistent practice, and most importantly, honest self-examination. Stephen turned back to face him. You have to be willing to look at your weaknesses without making excuses for them. You have to be willing to learn from people who know more than you do, even when that's humbling. Like tonight. Exactly like tonight. Stephen's expression softened slightly. The fact that you're still here, still asking questions instead of just making excuses, tells me you might actually get it. Get what? That being humbled isn't. The same thing as being humiliated. What happened to you today wasn't an attack on your worth as a person. It was a lesson in the difference between shallow and deep, between appearance and substance. Rafe sat quietly for a long moment, processing. So what happens now? Do I fire all my students and start teaching meditation classes? Stephen laughed, the first genuinely warm sound he'd made all evening. You keep teaching, but you change why you're teaching and how you measure success. What do you mean? Instead of asking, did this technique look impressive? Start asking, did this student understand something new about themselves? Instead of, how many views did this get? Ask, how much did these people grow today? Stephen moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. That old man who embarrassed you today? He's not your enemy. He's your teacher, if you're smart enough to let him be. What if he doesn't want to teach me? Then you'll have to earn it. By showing him that you're more interested in learning than in protecting your ego. By demonstrating that you can put your students' development ahead of your own image. And if I can't, if I'm not capable of changing that much? Stephen's expression grew serious. Then you should find another line of work. Because what you've been doing isn't martial arts. It's martial arts-flavored entertainment. And the people who trust you to teach them deserve better than that. With that, he walked toward the exit, leaving Rafe alone with his thoughts and the weight of everything that had been said. As the door closed behind Stephen, Rafe looked around his dojo. With new eyes, the dimmed lights and quiet space suddenly seemed full of possibility. Not for viral content or social media success, but for the kind of genuine learning he'd witnessed that evening. For the first time in years, he began to think less about what kind of instructor he wanted to appear to be, and more about what kind of teacher he actually wanted to become. The question was whether his pride would let him take the necessary first step, asking for help. 3 days passed before Rafe found the courage to approach Hawk. The old veteran arrived early for the evening class, moving through gentle stretches, with the careful precision of someone managing decades of wear on his body. Arthur, Rafe said quietly, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. Could I ask you something? Hawk paused mid-stretch, studying the younger man's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something vulnerable and uncertain. Of course. Would you teach me? The words came out in a rush, like. Rafe was afraid he'd lose his nerve. I mean, really teach me. Not just techniques, but whatever it was you were showing the students the other night. Hawk straightened slowly, considering. Around them, early arrivals were setting up their equipment, but they moved more quietly now, with less of the frenetic energy that had characterized the dojo before. Why? Hawk asked simply. Because I realized I've been teaching people to look like martial artists instead of helping them become martial artists. And I don't want to do that anymore. Teaching is about serving the student, not feeding the ego of the instructor. I understand that now. Hawk nodded slowly. Then yes, I'll teach you. 6 weeks later, Edge Strike martial arts looked subtly different. The neon lights remained, but they were softer now, used sparingly. Traditional calligraphy scrolls hung alongside the modern equipment. Students still used phones, but to record instructional content rather than flashy performances. Rafe knelt on the mat beside Hawk, helping correct a student's stance. His black belt was tied with a simple knot, no fancy embroidery or logo. He'd earned the right to wear it again through hours of patient practice, learning to feel rather than force, to guide rather than dominate. Remember, Hawk said to the gathered class, martial arts isn't about becoming someone who can hurt others. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to. I had demonstrated a technique with fluid grace, her movements echoing Hawk's teachings. Diego filmed quietly from the corner, his content now focused on the principles behind the techniques rather than their visual impact. Seagal sat in the corner, preparing to leave after his second visit. He caught Rafe's eye and nodded approvingly. This is what it looks like, Stephen said quietly as he gathered his things. When a place chooses substance over spectacle. As the evening wound down, Hawk led the traditional closing meditation. Students sat in quiet rows, breathing together, their practice extending beyond physical techniques into something deeper. Tomorrow, we build again, Hawk said, his voice carrying the promise of continuous growth, the humility of lifelong learning, and the quiet strength that comes from serving something greater than oneself. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.